Okay, moving to another topic. We're going to talk about planning, budgeting, reporting oversight. Let's see what we got here. We've talked about measuring financial performance. We're going to do a little bit of a review and go a little bit further in where we left off in that discussion. Here are the things. This actually will give you some insight as to phase 2, which is on the AICPA and the FASB's mind as to the type of accounting that they'd like to see for the nonprofit organization. They'd like to see the type of accounting that would answer the questions we're about to see. This is not easy to accomplish in the accounting world, and that's part of the controversy right now. But this is the issue. Are we doing the right thing? And when you look at these questions, do the following. Think in terms of the financial statements that we have learned about, and ask yourself inside, will the financial statements answer these questions? And one of the concerns that the FASB has is that no, not necessarily. So let's see, are we doing the right thing? Well, how do we know from the financial statements? Yeah, it tells us our program services, but what else does it tell us about the program services? Not a whole lot. Is it congruent with our mission? Well, maybe the titles of the program services tell us that it is, but are we really doing it? Is our mission being spent effectively? Are we reaching our goals? Look at this one. How do we measure and demonstrate success? Yeah, we're spending money, but is it well spent? Has it been done right? Efficient? Has it been spent efficiently? This question is a big one. And then, even more so, we might be doing something, but is it enough? Are we really making an impact with what needs to be taken care of? And there's a lot more questions one could ask about the nonprofit organization and its mission, and how well it's taking care of it. And this is a way to ask it. We need to evaluate. We have to evaluate how well the nonprofit is doing, because they don't have the market signals that the for-profit world has. If you're a for-profit organization and you're making money and your percentage of the bottom line is a great percentage and it's going up and every year you're making more dollars, well, people are buying your product. But what about the nonprofit world, where you're basically doing services for free, perhaps? So you're doing it based on donor dollars, but maybe the service doesn't help the people that we're trying to help the way we would like to help them. How do we know these things? Well, so that's where we leave this topic off, and maybe when we have Wednesday's class, we'll delve into it a little bit further. We'll see. But this is the issue: is how do you measure a nonprofit organization? What do the numbers tell you? And the concern right now is that we need more than that, and particularly in a world where I would add we have data. We have more data than we've ever had before in the history of businesses, and so the biggest area that's come up is the area of data analytics, and maybe that's what the FASB has in mind, is that through using data analytics, what they call big data, maybe we can judge a nonprofit organization in ways that we have not traditionally yet done. Okay, budget versus actual. When it comes to actually managing the nonprofit, this is a key, because if the budget is done correctly, that is, then following the budget versus actual is a way of really managing well. So if the board does its job and does a really honest job of budgeting what should it cost to do programs, to be effective with the programs as much as they can, with as much foresight as they can have, and then they compare it to the actual, then they can get some measurement to answer some of the questions that we had just now, which leads to perhaps in phase 2, one of the things that FASB might have in mind is perhaps the budget versus actual report should be shown in the financial statements, or at least as a part of the financial statement notes. Would that have meaning? I would argue that it does, and if you think of it, bring it up as a question on Wednesday, we can discuss it as to why I think it does, and maybe you'll have some thoughts as to why you think it does or doesn't. I'd be interested in having that discussion. Nevertheless, budget versus actual is an important tool for the board of directors. Transparency is the byword of the 21st century, and it certainly makes sense to consider that in terms of the nonprofit world. Okay, so we got a little interrupted there, but transparency, the byword of the 21st century for-profit business, has always been the byword of nonprofit organizations, even in the 20th century, since there's no ownership. So there's no reason for these organizations to withhold any information, which is an argument for why showing the budget versus actual could be part of a financial statement report, because what are we trying to hide? We shouldn't be hiding anything. We should try to show the outside world, with whatever information is relevant, how well the organization is operating, how well the organization is accomplishing its mission, or perhaps not. But we shouldn't be, as accountants, we shouldn't be holding back any information which would give the reader of the financial statement a complete picture, or as complete as we can, with the information that we deal with. And that's the question, what is there to hide? And since there's no ownership, the public needs and should know everything that they would be relevant. Here's the exception, though. The anonymous donor should be kept secret. I think that there's every reason to argue that anonymity, oh, I didn't say that well. You know what I mean. Having an anonymous donor and keeping that not transparent makes all the sense in the world. It's part of what drives the world of nonprofits. There are people who want to give and be donors, but they don't want necessarily to get in the limelight with their donation, and so that request should be honored. And indeed, for the most part, it is. Organizations know that their bread is buttered with donors, and if a donor says, "Don't tell anybody I gave this gift to you," that they're going to go out of their way to honor it, and there's no reason why the public should demand anything else, in my opinion. If you have another opinion, you could discuss that Wednesday. That'd be pretty interesting to talk about. Not saying I'm right. That's why I say it's in my opinion. Okay, we mentioned some of this, but I want to just go maybe a little bit different angle than we went before, talking about ratios and benchmarks of nonprofit organizations. Here's what we do for profits is we take a return on revenue, and that's really great for the for-profit world to judge for-profits and their success based on that. But does this have any relevance to the nonprofit world? I think not, particularly why studies have shown that most nonprofits return less than 5% on their revenues. And to even think that we can judge by how much more of a surplus a nonprofit organization can yield belies the whole purpose of the mission. Not to say that they cannot have a surplus. Of course, that we spoke in class that they should have a surplus, but is there a reason to measure them based on their surplus? That doesn't make sense, because they should be spending their money on the program and the causes for which they exist. How much should they spend? Well, maybe this is the right number. I don't know. Maybe leaving less than 5% as the surplus is the correct number. That's something we should think about as accountants, and maybe to get the economists of the world to help us think about: is there a benchmark for what the surplus should be with nonprofits? And the answer is that I don't know. Percentages are misleading, because the contribution margin, the actual dollar of what an organization may need for its surplus, that percentage in some cases may be very small. In other cases, it may be very large, the percentage. So I don't know if percentage makes sense in the way we look at nonprofit organizations. So maybe this is just not a good way to benchmark. And this is what return on revenue would look like. The change in net assets versus the revenue. So probably not, this is the equation, probably not a great one for nonprofits. Neither is this one. Would be, I think, arguably not a great ratio to use. Percent of return on assets. It's certainly true that for-profit businesses look at this with a microscope. They're watching this ratio. How this is relevant to the nonprofit world, I'm not sure it is. On the other hand, we do have some ratios which do make sense for nonprofits to be concerned about, and that is financial strength. We're concerned as potential donors giving to a nonprofit organization. We should be concerned about their ability to continue to stay in business, quote unquote, to stay vibrant, to stay serving the community. That's the liquidity ratios that the AICPA and the FASB has just indicated in the new changes, which is part of your research project, to indicate what additional information they're looking for in the financial statement notes to show readers about their liquidity and the ability to meet obligations and the ability to go forward, because a donor doesn't want to necessarily, and I think the donor is right to demand information that would help the donor know that they're about to give money to a sinking ship. That's not going to help the public with the money that they're donating for the public cause of the nonprofit organization. So some of the types of things that might show that would be, well, how much cash do they have on hand to take care of expenses that are coming up? It's typical for an organization, even for a for-profit organization, to hold 30, 60, or 90 days of cash on hand of future expenditures, meaning 30 days of expenses or 60 days or 90 days. The strongest indicator is usually in the 90-day range, but it varies by industry. But to have 90 days of future expenses in your bank account certainly gives you ample opportunity to meet your obligations, particularly in an industry, the nonprofit organization, which is often dependent on donors, and maybe the money's not coming in from gifts at the right time. So if you have the liquidity to withstand the ups and downs of the donation marketplace, so to speak, that might be a good thing for people to see. This shows you that we pulled a statistic that over half of the nonprofits have 90 days of cash, and of course half do not. So go figure. But that's a good benchmark, perhaps 3 months. So take a look at that. Here's a leverage ratio, debt leverage, and that might be an important ratio that is worthy of us using in the nonprofit world. We certainly don't want to be seeing an organization get over their head in debt because they've got to service the debt. Remember, it's got to get paid back. The more the debt rises and the interest expense associated with that, the greater chance that the nonprofit organization may default. And that leads to the, you know what that noise means, in case you didn't catch it the first time. So that's probably a good ratio to use to judge nonprofits. And here's some perhaps benchmarks for that ratio, where you see that this amount might be the one that's too high. So you can see that the 10 to 15% is good, perhaps, but it would be good to start developing some benchmark in that area. All right, this is another ratio which I think has real merit to take a look at. That is for the organization to let the public know if there's one particular revenue source, one particular donating source, a donor, let's say one donor or a couple that are making up a high percentage of their total revenue. That's important because if they lose that funding source, oops, that's what it is, and oops with capital letters. Parenthetically, I was involved with a nonprofit organization some 10, 15 years back, and the CEO, pardon the expression, pissed off the major donor, and I mean it was a major donor, and they just cut off entirely. And the next several years was devastating to the organization, and it took them about 5 years to recover from that. And so in the meantime, the public suffered due to lack of services, due to lack of the organization being able to meet the demands of their mission. So I think readers should be aware of our reliance on a major donating source. So this is the opposite of the ratio we just saw, where you are able to sustain yourself as a nonprofit because you are earning fees. Perhaps you have maybe it's a combination of donations and fees, but maybe the percentage of the earned revenue, the fees for services that you're doing, is high enough compared to your expenses that now you are not in danger of being subject to the whims of one donating source or a couple that are concentrated. And as long as the services that are earning the revenue are viable and have going concern, what's the word? Going concern viability, then you're in good shape. You could be in good shape. So this ratio, the opposite of the other one, could be an indicator of the ability to continue on without much hiccups and hesitations. Okay, I'm going to hold here and pick it up in a little bit.